happy to introduce you to Miquel Noguer Alonso today. He's probably one of the most appropriate speakers for this seminar series, which is called the CFM and UBS AI and Research Seminar, Data Research Seminar. So his topic and his expertise falls exactly at the epicenter of what we're doing with the seminar. In fact, he's been a speaker at CFM. We just sort of reminded ourselves in 2019, just before lockdown, and he was talking about neural networks and applications to finance. And it's, it seems like a century ago, but in the meantime, there's been a whole boom of AI and NLP and large language models. And, I think that it's fair to say that Dr. Noguer Alonso has been right there from the start, sort of experimenting with large language models, giving it many creative tasks, finding what it's good at and what it's not good at. And so he really has like a lot of papers, I think 3 papers in this domain, and he's writing a book on AI applications to finance. So really a great speaker that I'm happy to have for a second time. So Miquel, thank you very much, and take it away. And and small note, if you have some questions, if you're on Zoom, please write them in the chat. And obviously, if you're in the room and you have some question, let's, would you like us to keep them to the end, or would you like to be getting questions in the middle? Okay, so if you have a good question that you would like to ask during the talk, please raise your hand and we'll try to accommodate. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Sasha, for inviting me. I also work for UBS, so so it seems like everything fits, so to speak. Anyway, so yeah, my last talk here was about a very different topic, because it's kind of connected with this, because in 2020 I was talking about LSTMs and all that kind of stuff, right? And this is because in 2018 we launched the Artificial Intelligence Finance Institute, which is a company that we offer boot camps and certificates on AI in finance. And again, we started in 2018 when things were starting to be interesting. Not everybody was on board, right? Not everybody should be on board. So there are many ways in which finance can be addressed, obviously more parametrically, less parametrically, and all that kind of stuff. As mathematicians, we still think that, well, more parametrically, it's the choice, but many things cannot be done fully parametrically. So we need transformers and neural networks and all that kind of stuff. And now we are combining with a platform called QuantFrame. So we are creating a platform to do all this. So tonight, or this evening, I'm going to talk about 3 different use cases, right? About LLMs. Okay, obviously, I'm not going to spend time discussing defining LLMs. I guess everybody in the audience knows what LLMs is, a bunch of transformers, and you're trying to predict next token. So in the end, it's the joint probability distribution of a sequence of tokens, right? And the surprise was, so to speak, right? LSTMs back in even in 2017 were showing that they were starting to be able to kind of do text creation, so to speak, or text generation in a kind of very surprising way, right? So we have experiments dating from, again, pre-transformers, in which you pick LSTMs and you read all the Shakespeare plays, and you ask the LSTMs, can you produce a Shakespeare play? And the answer was, oh wow! Even at that point, it was like, oh, it seems that at every epoch, this thing is able to kind of recreate a kind of a Shakespeare world, right? even back then, you could say, right, LSTMs were also inventing names, right, like that were kind of Shakespeare-like, right? So the machine was getting it, right? And obviously everything exploded when Bashbani and collaborators, right, somehow invented transformers who are as really very efficient, right, to do all these tasks. And then 2 years ago, almost, right, so we started having, well, BERT was already showing, kind of, BERT and sentence BERT and so on were already showing, right, signs of, this speaks English, this understands English, this understands the semantics of a text, so we can do lots of supervised learning. Still, I'll be talking today that you shouldn't abandon, so to speak, your NLP, right? In many, maybe for some tasks you're going to need, or you're going to prefer to do some fine tuning with BERT instead of trying to do fine tuning for example, with an LLM or REG with an LLM, right? So, and that's also something that I wanted to say today, right? That the old NLP is still useful, right? In the sense that the old supervised learning is still useful because, you're tempted to say, I'm going to do everything with elements, even time series, right? I'm going to pick a time series. I prompt the time series to the LLM and say, what's next, right? And use kind of the machinery to some sort of do supervised learning, right? And so on, right? Then before starting, I also wanted to mention something. It's like, obviously, where LLMs are being used not only to produce text, but to do maths and to write code, right? Which are two things that are very close to us because we are writing mathematics, right? We try to build models for financial markets, for prediction, or for option pricing, or for delta hedging, and so on, right? And the surprising thing, obviously, is that also LLMs are kind of getting better and better at doing mathematics, right? But obviously, when I'm saying that, not all mathematics, right? So Terence Tao was saying, I think Terence Tao was saying last week that LLMs are not even a grad on mathematics, right? I have a different opinion. Obviously, I'm not Terence Tao, right? So he's that's much more. But what I'm saying is there's no reason on why, and there are papers around that LLMs, that transformers cannot learn, to do PD, to solve PDs, to solve 4Ds, to do differentiation, integration. Transformers can learn to integrate, to differentiate, to do PDs, and even SDEs, okay? The caveat is that they need specific data sets, okay? And this is also something I wanted to say today. Depending on the task, maybe you're not good just by reading things in the internet, right? So you're not able to do integration and so on at a very high level, right? Unless you have a very good data set and you've been trained over millions of examples. This is what Meta did, right? Francois Charton and his team. So you can do mathematics, but what I'm saying is, I'm sure OpenAI and Anthropic and so on have specific data sets, right? To do specific things, right? Again, that cannot be learned just by, reading something, right? And so on the internet. Coding is the same thing, okay? I'm sure everybody here knows, Claude 3.5 is pretty good at coding. You ask something that probably Claude 3.5 has seen, like, for example, can you write a Q-learning kind of code? And this is like through 200 lines of code. So this is not a simple thing. So this is not a supervised learning 10 lines of code, but it is 200, right? And it does it well, right? Okay, what else? So it's a long intro, right? And obviously there's the other side of the coin, or there's a side of the coin that is there. Obviously there is the hallucinations, right? So LLMs do mistakes, right? And you know, they do 15% of times do mistakes, 18% of the times they do mistakes, right? Maybe not producing text, you know, I'm sure when you read, I think I haven't seen a typo in a year that is produced by the element, right? So when it comes to, but when it comes to execute code, write code, do maths, execute maths, write new text, machine oftentimes, it does mistakes. Where do these mistakes come from, right? So sometimes mistakes come from the fact that the machine doesn't know about the topic, and this can happen. Machine maybe hasn't read the last paper on, I don't know, category theory, right? And it doesn't know, right? Okay, so the lack of knowledge can be there, right? Okay, you want to do something and machine doesn't have enough expertise or right, and then you need to do what? You need to show the papers and to do retrieval augmented generation of this kind of stuff to tell the machine, listen, you have to read these two things that I think might help us or might help you to do a better job, right? So lack of knowledge, right? It's obviously one aspect. And another aspect is the cutoff. Obviously, maybe, I don't know, you ask the results of the Champions League and it hasn't read that, the games are just finished, right? And so on. So cutoff things are also there, right? There are glitches, right? It forgets things and so on, right? So, and this is probably one of our main jobs when using LLMs. You'll see that even if you see that the machine, kind of knows about biology or knows about stochastic calculus, right? You have to check everything, so to speak. Equations might be wrong, right? If the machine, you kind of see that probably if you ask 20 times about Black-Scholes, it does it very well because Black-Scholes kind of is kind of mainstream, right? But if you ask them to solve a PDE, maybe you get 4 or 5 different versions of a PDE, right, produced by the machine, right? Some of them with mistakes, right? Okay. So our real job somehow, and will be, because LLMs have improved big time from inception, so to speak, to track these hallucinations, right? Obviously, before giving output to our clients or giving output to our traders or to the supervisor, right? And so on. Okay, and so, and you will see here, right, that part of our job again is try to and how can you, right, find ways to reduce hallucinations? So here we'll see, right? So if you produce code, you need to look at the outcome. You need to obviously look at the beginning when we were doing this, the beginning of this year, sometimes code didn't even run, right? So machines weren't producing code that wasn't executed even. Now things are better, right? So obviously it doesn't execute, the code is wrong, right? But then you look at the output and so on. And now lately there's a new solution, which is, that we oftentimes use, which is that you try to solve a PDE here, right? And obviously you try to ask 2 other good LLMs, right? If they can do that, or even if they can review what the other element has done, okay? So this is a pretty efficient way to kind of see, you see what I mean? Even when you write something, you write something in GPTO, you show to Claude 3.5, say, read this, tell me what you think, right? And we were talking before, a year ago, LLMs were kind of not very nice and so on, always saying, oh, this is pretty good. But now they've learned to be kind of more useful in the sense that now they say, oh, but you haven't written a good literature review. So you literally don't only cite 2 papers, they're literally 15 papers about category theory, or 20 or 30. You see, you only cited 2, right? And so on. Okay, so I think, again, I've done a long introduction, but So and you'll see that here maybe any quant, any so that wants to use them, right? So I think it needs to go to you know, a thorough evaluation process, right? And we wrote we have in SSRN 3 papers. This is the first one that we wrote with Anne Dupuy, who's in a French bank. She's a algorithmic trader, right? And we started working on this in April this year, and you'll see it's not rocket science. It's about like you know, write and execute code to do MACD, for example, which is a technical analysis. It's a very simple thing, right? Okay. And back then was GPT-4 Turbo, Gemini Pro, and Mistral, Llama 2, and Code Llama. Literally literally all the LLMs that were kind of okay. Obviously, you know, next thing that you discuss when you start talking about LLMs is how about prompting, right? Is it prompting everything that I need to make them work and reduce hallucinations to the mean, right? And obviously, I guess everybody here in the audience knows the more precise you are with the request, you probably, you know, the machine's gonna understand better what you're trying to say, what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to do, right? Okay, so the problem with the prompts is that there's not such thing of a universal prompt, right? Okay, so when you talk to GPTO, you have to do it in some language. When you talk to Claude 3.5 Sonnet, you need to, you know, it kind of understands things a little bit different. When you talk to Gemini Advanced, it kind of understands things different way. Also, there's an evolution. So maybe the same prompt 6 months ago is understood a little bit different today. Okay, so obviously there's this kind of and obviously this is a little unsettling for everybody. The fact that you know, sometimes it's not a super mature technology, right? And everybody has to be aware of that, right? So for example, Llama index, right? And so on. So they're changing thing constantly, which is not helping you, right? When, you know, when you're using something and some sort of the provider is kind of, anyway. So this is a thing you're gonna need to consider, right? That they do changes, that also Llama index are making changes, meaning that, you know, except if you use open source, which is something that you should consider, right? Like here was Llama 2, now is Llama 3, right? Obviously, open source gives you the opportunity to freeze things, right? To have transparency over the code, and so on and so forth, right? And privacy and all that kind of stuff. So here, in this very simple example, what the idea was, right? We create prompts, right, for each LLM, right, of these, right, to some sort of using templated responses, right? You should also devise some system, right, to, when you do complicated stuff, to even understand what's going on, right? So tell me where you are, right? Something like that, right? For the LLM, you don't know where it is, right? It is computing, it's executing LSTMs, or what are you doing now, right? So when you do complicated stuff, we devised a system in which the machine was telling us, I'm still working on it, or I'm stuck somewhere, right? And so on, right? But in order not to let's say do this very long, you can read the paper. The paper is in SSRN. So the idea was compare the results, right, with Talib, right? So here's a very simple problem. You already know the algorithm, right? So and you know how you write it too, right? But the idea was let's figure out a system in which you kind of ask the machine, you know, write the code, and then you can first look at if the code has been executed, and the second, just if the results fit with tallied results. If the results fit, means that the code has been correctly written, the windows have chosen the same ones, and so on and so forth, which was one source of problems, obviously, right? Because when you talk about MSCD, you know, you have windows, and you know, then maybe the machine decides to choose a different one, right? And so on. Okay. Anyway, so so again, the reference was Talib, which is this kind of Python wrapper in which you have these 150 technical analysis indicators, ADX, MACD, RSI, Bollinger Bands, and so on. In the paper, we also discuss, and the idea is you ask the machine, can you write code to do MACD with Apple, right? And so on. This is our, and also back then, chain of thought has been kind of something, right? That even in 2023 started to be some sort of. So there's a very good paper that was out this week by some Chinese researchers talking about chain of thought and the fact that transformers, if you do right, the chain of thought can literally do anything, right? In the sense that many things are sequential tasks, right? And chain of thought, let's say is pushing, let's say the LLM to some sort of start doing the things in steps. So you first solve this, then you do that, then you do that, and so on and so forth, right? So also back then, or way and collaborators in 2023, so reasoning also is about, right? It's about, and the LLMs again seem to be able to do pretty much anything, right? When asked, when correctly, tasking, so to speak, right? The things. Anyway, let me accelerate a bit. Okay, so so we had these guys: GPT-4 Turbo, Gemini Pro, Llama 2, Codellama, Mistral, which are kind of to the, let's say, not a little bit also to speak, but yeah. So prompt design, right? So again, I kind of railed against prompting, right? And indeed is your friend, right? So you have to think about prompting the same way you talk with your colleagues, so to speak. You're writing a paper, right? And you're telling your colleague, you should write the literature review. Don't forget that there's this paper written by these guys. We also need to talk about, I don't know, attention is all that you need, and so on and so forth, right? And the more, and prompting is somehow, sometimes it reminds me a bit the agent approach. So a lot of people talks about agents and LLM agents these days, right? A lot of people, right? So in the end, you also are kind of with the prompts, you're also somehow doing a little bit the same thing, right? Like calling functions, doing things, you write this, you use LSTMs, you give me the results, you build graphics, and then you create a notebook. And this is similar to kind of, okay? And again, it's a little bit kind of unsettling for people that has done coding for decades, the fact that, again, that it's not a universal language, that the outcome might be slightly different every time that you do it, and the different elements might understand different things, and the same prompt, used in a different context might give rise to different outcomes. Okay, but here, let me accelerate a bit. Yeah, we built this idea of temporary response technique in the sense that what's going on, the response, I'm done, the response is complete, processing incomplete, I'm still thinking, wait for a second, right? And or even, right, this idea that sometimes doesn't even generate the outcome, right? I don't know if you've done code, right? Or for example, if you ask the machine to generate notebooks, for example, and it's sometimes when you ask, can you generate a notebook? It does it, let's say 50% of the times you need a second prompt to say, okay, now do this and generate a notebook, right? Because, it's kind of, okay. Okay, let me just maybe go to, so the evaluation is kind of, as I said, right, is the code executable, right? So the idea is I'm not going to check all the code, right? I need a faster way to figure out if you're doing the right thing. So first of all, is the code executing? And again, this is kind of 6 months old, right? Today, I would say that given the rate of progress, I think all 3 LLMs commercially available would do that very, very well, right? And code would be executable. But back then it wasn't, right? And GPT Turbo was kind of better than the others, right? Then the second, it's about, okay, so this is a program that I can execute and can do a back testing and give me the RMSC, right? So I compare the RMSC of different models, right? So that's an indirect way to check the code, right? So if you give me the result, the same result, it's because it's done the same thing, right? And so on, right? And the third is compare the code effectiveness, right? Okay, so you can see if the code is faster, is slower, and so on and go. Now, what can you do also today? You can also say, you can pick the code that was generated by GPTO and show to Claude 3.5 and see, do you like the code? Do you think it could be improved? And you would be surprised, of maybe, sometimes Claude 3.5 says yes, but the dropout rate that you use, I think should be a little bit lower, right? Okay, so depending on the task, also again, they're kind of pretty knowledgeable on especially if you do machine learning, actually, right? Or if you do reinforcement learning, more than if you do, things like, it's funny because let me just explain an anecdote, which is, if you ask about finance, right, purely about finance, to LLMs are very good, but after 2 years, if you ask about, can you tell me about compounded returns or linear returns, it doesn't know about compounded returns, right? But it knows about Fama French, 5 factors. It can write Fama French in using C++, anything about factor models and so on, right? But it doesn't know what compounded returns are, right? That's anyway. So just let me accelerate a bit here, because I have 100 slides, so we don't have time. So the results are basically, here, GPT-4 Turbo was ahead of pretty much all of them except Gemini. So back then, let's say not all of them were able to even write simple programs that were executable, right? Again, right now, it's a different thing. These are the results, the RMSC. And again, back then, GPT Turbo seemed to be, the right tool to do this, which was very close to Talib and so on. Okay. Okay. Then what we've done also is just to look at the backtest, right? And you see if there are differences, right? For example, this is, an algorithm MACD, and you say Gemini Pro kind of is different, and it's because if you look then at the code, Gemini was picking a different window at the beginning. It was kind of, it did a different choice, right? And this could happen, you know, maybe the machine, it often happens when you ask the machine to do machine learning, right? You know, maybe you don't like the dropout rate that the machine has somehow chosen, right? Maybe you don't like the fact that it's using 3 layers instead of 2 layers and so on, right? So obviously code has a lot of, it can be executable, but maybe it's not the optimal, for example, machine learning wise, okay? So be vigilant, right? And hallucinations also might occur, right? When anyway, so okay. The second thing I wanted to talk, so let's skip this, was this paper that we up there. It's actually I think 2 weeks in SSRN, and it has 1,000 downloads, and it's a very simple one, right? It's about we're gonna pick the largest 5 US stocks, right? We're gonna pick the 10 Qs. We're gonna give the 10 Qs to the machine. We're gonna ask a simple prompt. Tell me about the company and the future of the company. So very simple prompt, right? Okay, so Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, Apple, and Tesla, and you pick GPTO, Cloud 3.5, and get mini advance. Okay, so and that's and pretty much everything was machine generated, so to speak, in the sense that I asked the machine, right, first, right, how would you evaluate? And the machine, how would you evaluate the stock, right? And the machine said, okay, you could ask these questions, right? For example, right? You should be paying attention to revenue trends, profitability metrics, cost management, cash flow analysis, and future outlook. So you would say a pretty thorough kind of financial analysis, right? That you could ask the machine to perform, right? So and these were right, and so to some extent this is an example of RAG, right? And obviously there's a lot of discussion out there about retrieval augmented generation, right? So let me say something about stocks, LLMs, and retrieval augmented generation and forecasting stocks before that, right? We wrote a paper, or I wrote a paper that I haven't even released about what kind of questions are you asking the LLMs, or what kind of questions do we ask ourselves, right? So RAG basically is asking, you ask questions about things that you have in the data set, like for example, what were the revenues of Google in 2021? And you want this to be right. You want the machine to be able to go there and correctly retrieve what were the revenues of Google 2021. Okay. Many people says this solves hallucinations. This is obviously wrong, right? And why is wrong? Right? Because many questions are not things that we know for sure in the past that can be grounded. Okay, investing is about, in the end, figuring out the future. Okay, so if we assume that efficient market hypothesis means that, you know, we're gonna read all this fast, we're gonna you know, figure out you know, these some sort of revenue analysis and all that kind of stuff, right? So these are again questions that you can ground, right? Then the summarizations that the machine does so well, because I've talked about hallucinations, about coding, but it's certainly the machine excels. LLMs excel at what? Obviously at summarizing stuff, right? They're really good at summarizing stuff. You pick a 10Q, say, give me 2-3 highlights, right, of the 10Q, right? And it's very, you know, capable of doing some sort of summarization. But stock picking is not about the past. In the end, it's about the future, right? So whatever is going to happen with Apple, the glasses, the AIs, the iPads, and so on, right? And here, I'm not following the slides, right? But what I'm saying is the kind of interesting questions that we'll be asking the LLM are extrapolation questions, are prediction questions, cannot be grounded. No, there's no way in the past in which you know what's going to be the price of Apple in 2 years. You can do all the RAG that you want. You want torture, you can read the Bible, 20 times and so on. There's nothing like that there, right? So the interesting questions, oftentimes, that we want to ask the LLMs are not in the data set. Okay. I think it was kind of 6 months ago in Fordham, we were discussing this, right? And so one of the important things about this paper and about what people is doing with LLMs is about using the extrapolations that the machine does, right? To kind of think about the future of Apple, the future of Google, the future of Amazon. Nobody knows, right? There's no place in you can read what's going to happen with NVIDIA, right? And so on, right? So we should be. So Quantz surprisingly said, "Listen, we're kind of using LLMs to generate scenarios." Okay, so there's another use that it's not RAG and it's about using the extrapolation abilities of the LLMs. Okay, and one example was, for example, we want to build a portfolio that it's kind of protected for deflation, for example, and you say, well, the machine will never find what happened with stocks in a deflationary environment because this has never happened in the United States, so to speak, right? But you can use the machine to say, what do you think would be the impact on the oil sector in a deflationary environment? Okay. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should trust all the artificial generation of scenarios and all that kind of stuff. But certainly you can use this machine to think about even scenarios that have never happened, right? Even generate new scenarios, right? And so on. So data generation is kind of a potential thing. So on this paper, right? At least when it comes to pick a 10Q, Amazon, Google, and so on, the three LLMs do an excellent job, like reading and saying, the company has had a terrific second quarter 2024, revenues are up, and so on and so forth, right? You can read the paper, right? I kind of ask lots of things like for example, tell me about the credit profile without giving any hint about how you need to assess credit. And the machine kind of get it in the sense that no, the kind of the credit profile of the company, it has a rating of AA, right? It has a solid balance sheet, it has a strong capital and so on, you see. So as I was telling him, I think that if we look at this, you start to think that this is kind of a CFA level, even level 3, kind of. You see what I mean? It's able to, yeah.
So what we're seeing here is the output of the LLM after you prompted it, or?
Exactly.
And so you gave it a structure, or it invented this structure?
All the three have different answers, so to speak. So this kind of structuring things a little bit differently, right? Okay, in the paper you'll see better all the details, but this is, I think, NVIDIA and GPTO, right? So you would say it certainly can produce, if NVIDIA wants to write, you know, you give the numbers and the machine can literally write that or even produce a thank you, okay, or the earnings release and so on. Now, so summarizing, understanding the main aspects of it, you know, they do that very well, right? All three, right? GPTO seems to, you know, give a little bit more details and so on, but you wouldn't say this is massively better, right? It's just that it's kind of writing things differently, right? And the RAG was perfect, right? So here we didn't have any problems. So the all three had, you know, went to the document and found all the right numbers, right? Of course, this is not a good example of RAG because it's like, what happens if I need to read 1 million of these documents, right, instead of one? Okay, but this is, you know, all of them, some sort of, you know, did perfectly well, right? They found the revenue, EPS, operating income. There was a bit of hallucinations when we were using them in Apple. You know that Apple is September the year, right? So it's a bit confusing, Apple, the fact that the year, right, it's the first quarter 2024 is actually 2023, right? So the machine, if your prompt is not good enough, might give you wrong results because confusing these kind of things, right? The machine also seems to have an understanding of what's US GAAP and FARS. It seems to understand well the fact that there are accounting standards, right? And this is something we're actually working on it today, right? If asking the machine, can you kind of do IFRS to US GAAP? You see, can you do accounting well, right? And go back and forth from one to another if you give the right information and so on, right? Now we ask about like preference, right? So this is stock picking. Like, what do you think about, right? And they kind of have a different ideology, right? Okay, so GPTO said Amazon, right? Nvidia, Apple, Meta, Tesla. Now, there's a surprise here. The surprise is, you know, we all say, okay, these are black boxes. We don't know what happens in these trillions of parameters and so on. But you can ask why you choose Amazon first instead of Meta. And Sonnet and Gemini Advanced was saying, oh, Meta has had a very several strong quarters with good revenues and so on, and you know, is showing some sort of you know. And we were discussing before, right? So what does it tell you about them, right? And they also have an ideology when choosing stocks. Maybe you don't agree with the ideology they choose. What do I mean by ideology is that in the end, you have valuation metrics, you have growth metrics, you have risk factors. You have to put all that in a weighting machine and say, I think this is the best stock when I consider valuation, growth, risk factors, and so on and so forth, right? The good thing about, so probably the machine is inheriting biases, right? So, and then we go to the idea of, do we really want the biases in stock picking or we don't? And there's no definite answer on this, right? You understand what I mean? Some people is born growth, some people is born value, right? Yeah, portfolio managers kind of have ideologies. You see what I mean? Right? Very strong ideologies, especially fundamental managers are very, you know, and some of them just don't change stocks for 5 years, right? Because they're, no, you know, I like everything that Elon does, so I always have his stocks, you know, everywhere, right? And you see what I mean? The good thing about the LLM, so to speak, is that you can some sort of obviously disagree with that and say, no, I want you to consider differently the weights. I want you to, you know, be more value than growth. I want you to be aware that we think that there's going to be a recession in the United States in the fourth quarter. So tell me that in the case in which we have a recession in the fourth quarter, right? You see what I mean? Now, there's other things you can do about LMMs and stocks, which is there's a vector that tells us about Tesla, right? Is this good positive sentiment or negative sentiment? Okay, the example that was more kind of interesting, and we'll have a long discussion, was what should you do about Volkswagen? You know, the Volkswagen had the diesel scandal. So the machine is going to read and say, this is not a good company. It's a company that cheated and had bad performance. And then they said, and this is still there. Probably the vector representing Volkswagen still has negative, a little bit of negative sentiment, right? Maybe your portfolio managers also still has to say, I'm never going to buy this whatever, right, a stock, because still remember they cheated and you see what I mean? Some people says you have to neutralize the vectors and make them neutral, right? And only look at what's happened last 2 years and so on. See what I mean? So,
Miquel, we have a question from online. It's how much of the tests of the LLM testing was outside the knowledge cutoff date? So for example, these 10 Qs, were they recent or were they in the data period that the training of the LLM occurred?
No, that's a very good question, right? I think there was, we did that in July, right? And yeah, this is a good question to explain what I wanted to say. We discussed before being here, this idea of I think the only way to evaluate LMMs stock-wise can only be that with the information we have today, with the cutoffs today, and so on, we kind of forecast the future, and then we look at what happened after. There's some papers out there that do back testing. I think this is wrong, right? Because what's the problem? You're using the vectors of NVIDIA saying, oh, this is a terrific company. But you didn't know that 5 years ago, that the company had such a, if you use the vectors now, then, you know, you're kind of, you see what I mean, doing target leakage in the machine learning lingo. See, and some people is claiming LMMs, there's a very famous paper with thousands of, that claims that, but this is wrong. You know, you cannot recreate the idea of what were you thinking 5 years ago, not what you were thinking now about 5 years ago, because you know that Tesla has done very well. Okay, so that's target leakage, right? The only good test is what's going to happen, right? And there we don't. I have to say that it's hard. It's hard, and this is telling you something that we've been telling our students for many years. Is like, well, some students come to you and say, okay, now that we can do NLP, we can read everything about Apple, so we know everything. But knowing everything about the past, the historical Apple, that doesn't mean that you have a better edge of understanding what's going to happen in 2 years, which is what you want to do. You see what I mean? So NLP is also telling you that many historical information is just not useful. It's just noise. The fact that Steve Jobs was born somewhere, well, that's fine. That's a nice story that we all love and so on. That is this telling you something about? No, not at all. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just wondering, is there any way that maybe you can put something in the prompt that eliminates the prior of model, meaning that because you use historical data to train the LLM model, it may have some preference to some comments depending on their past performance. Is there any way to eliminate all of those like past memories to?
Some people was kind of, for example, if you have BERT, that it's more flexible, you can modify. Some people was changing the vectors, right, of what Tesla means and neutralizing them. I'm not so sure that you want to do this. So it's not clear that you have to eliminate biases, right? In the sense that biases tell you things about the past, right? And then you might think that the fact that Volkswagen was cheating, that doesn't mean that in the future this is going to have a kind of a repetition and so on. So you shouldn't be trusting the company, right? And we don't know, right? We hope not, probably not, because now they're under scrutiny. So they're now going to behave better than the normal citizens, so to speak, right? So can they do stock picking? Yes. Can they explain why they do picking? Yes. Do you agree with them? Maybe not. Maybe you're more value, more growth. Maybe you don't like tech companies. Maybe again, you think that there's going to be a recession in the fourth quarter and you want to factor in this here. You see, maybe you want to do supervised learning, obviously, with time series and so on. I think the toolbox is there, right? That doesn't mean that you don't have to do, a factor model. That doesn't mean that you should just delete the factor model. We're not saying that. What we're saying is that in a few months, all the information, financial markets information, will be first digested by LLMs. You have the earnings releases that are 2 weeks. Portfolio managers literally have a lot of information coming, right? They don't even have time, right? And the machine can read and at least say, in a few seconds, we haven't seen anything strange in the 10Q. Results are good, right? So we don't change buy to hold and so on. You see what I mean? Maybe you want to do also more sophisticated things like M&A forecasting and all that kind of stuff, right? There's a caveat here, obviously, that this is almost financial analysis. There are no news here, right? Okay, so there's another aspect if you want to be tracking. Yeah, okay. And the last thing is we're writing in a paper that is this time series LLMs, right? So the Chronos, all right, and so on, right? And what's the preempt? We've done a lot of time series over the years, right? Artemis, LSTMs, Varmas, and all that kind of stuff, right? Because we attended the econometric course, we didn't skip the classes, and we were using, right? And here there's no financial time series, right? Exercises, but we're finishing a paper in which we have used them, right? And let me say something about time series and financial time series. So one thing about LLMs and the fact that they're so good in doing many tasks is that language and many tasks that humans do have a lot of structure. So they're highly dimensional, but not too highly dimensional. So there are a few words that I can be saying after the last one, but not an infinite number. So you would say, you see what I mean? So language has a lot of structure. Even a 3-year-old is able to, or 2-year-old is able to speak and understand and so on, right? So financial time series don't have the kind of strong structure, right? That, that literally, the returns of Apple on Monday could be, I don't know, anywhere from, 1.5% to -1.5%, whatever, right? So the fact that the machine has seen a lot of electric time series and a lot of energy time series and other time series, that I think that here it's not giving you an X compared to do supervised learning. which is you pick the time series, you do supervised learning. You see what I mean? Okay. But I think this has to be the modeling mindset, right? That you always need to think, right? Do I need to be more specialized doing this? Or I can use the generalization, you know, this thing that has seen lots of things, right? That can help me in lots of contexts, but probably to do time series, no, right? Or to do, you know, very specific mathematics, then you say, well, there, you know, we don't know, right? If the machine, right? As I said before, if you ask the machine to do Black-Scholes, it can do, you know, it has no problems, right? It has seen a million times Black-Scholes, right? We do. But figuring out something else. So again, here are the time series LLMs, which are, again, being trained in, you know, climate data records, right? Global historical climatology. So this is like Llama, right? I don't think, again, this we can extrapolate the same kind of generality on, can you use like Llama to look at Apple returns? They say, of course, yes, but you probably do, again, supervised learning, right? So all of them have been trained. Some of them, like Kronos, have been actually trained in high frequency, right? But if you have high frequency data and you have lots of them and so on, why don't you just build, you know, transformers, LSTMs and so on, and you do your supervised learning, you control more the data set, you control more the, you see what I mean, right? So I don't think here we don't see, okay. So all of them have been trained in again, very colorful kind of like retail transaction data, traffic flow data, energy demand, so hourly electricity consumption, and so on. Also, we know that SDs are hard, right? Because we know that we're having a hard time to say this is the SD that generates this, right? When it comes to financial time series. So why the machine would be better at choosing a specific one just because it has seen lots of them, right? Maybe in the future, what we will see is different combinations of this. Is like, I would see this like more useful is like the data sets are more relatable to, right? Like you've been training this in 1,000 stocks and then you use that for a stock. You see, that would be kind of a nice, probably more useful, right? Kind of that just this very different context kind of, right? But you can, right? You can also do yourself, right? You can also prompt the last year of Apple and say, give me next day, you know, okay. So you can obviously, you can do something, you know, for example, you generate a synthetic time series, which is Fibonacci numbers, and GPTO spots very, very fast that this is a Fibonacci, right? Or this is a sinus function with a little bit of noise. So it kind of, but again, financial time series with this lack of strong structure, you know, the machine, again, right? This leads us to maybe one of the final comments I want to do is that we should never forget in which context we're using the LLM. Okay, so if we're trying to discuss with the LLM the results of the Premier League this Saturday, you know, there's no reason there's no reasonable reason that an LLM could kind of do that better than, I don't know, an expert or a supervised learning kind of algorithm that you've trained, you know. Remember, if you do supervised learning, at least you know what is the data set, what is the weights, and so on. You have more control over the model, right? So it's non-parametric if you do machine learning, but it's much more parametric than knowing nothing about how the machine is kind of, you see what I mean? So this is I would say the last resort of parametricity, because non-parametricity, because you don't even know the data set, right? At least in other data sets, right? So also again, right? So time series are also being re-seen, so revisited by using this foundational, right? Other comments are, you know, this idea about transformers and time series. Transformers don't seem to be as let's say as hegemonic, so to speak, when it comes to time series, numerical time series, that they are when we do text, right? So there's this, when we do transformers, which has one, we don't see kind of again the same kind of hegemony that we see when we do text, in which transformers really shine, right? But I don't think time series, I don't think you have other speakers that will tell you that transformers are the way to go when it comes to time series, right? They're kind of not bad, but maybe LSTMs are right. Okay, but this is definitely an interesting way. Again, I would be more in favor of maybe doing a financial LLM that has been trained on time series, but financial time series that kind of, it's a little bit more used to the roughness of the problem rather than, you know, okay. So again, the time GDP also, has been a little bit trained, right? This can also, again, you know, maybe when you see this, there's the, and you're a data scientist, then maybe another bell is ringing. They say, oh, maybe the machine has already seen that, right? Because maybe the machine has seen Apple and so on, right? But anyway, so this is what we, and in conclusion, right? So I think a very important thing when using LLMs, again, is trying to, in addition to thoroughly test them, right? It's very fast in general, you know, and is, well, this idea that you can write in a book, you can read in a book that we will release, it's about a data scientist should be aware of the kind of toughness of the problem, right? And understand too, if the machine, again, right, we shouldn't be too surprised or too impressed about the fact that it remembers everything now from the past, right? Now the machine knows everything about Apple. It has read everything and so on. But again, we need to understand, is this giving me an edge on the task I'm trying to perform, right? And sometimes the answer is yes, having a good memory and knowing all these details. In many occasions, for the human tasks, right, that have high entropy, you know, entropies LLMs will not surpass entropy, so to speak, right? You know, entropy, excuse me, LLMs playing chess will also, or playing poker, well, they also have the entropy when you play poker and so on, and game theory and so on. But the good thing is that obviously, if you have theses about, you can test them, right? You can test the way we do here, right? So this is what we recommend. Use them, but you know, test them, see the outcome, and so on. Maybe you don't agree with the outcome, etc., right? Yeah.
So we have some questions online, but I'd like to give the students here an opportunity to ask a few questions. I know that some of you are working on projects that use LLM. Do you have some questions for the speaker? Yeah.
So just wondering,
could you take this?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, and just wondering how you deal with the hallucination for all of those projects.
Yeah, so in the first one, which was here, hallucinations were, some of them were not good coders, right? And I would say that now nobody will have, let's say, no company will be offering an LLM that is so bad at coding, right? Yeah, you see what I mean? So I think, you know, here we were saying that some of them were not even executing. I think this doesn't happen today, right? Okay, so that's one thing, right? And how do they train the machines? Actually, you know, they have a bunch of people that generate Python examples, right? So it's like also coding, right? It's about generating a data set in which the transformers can learn different situations and so on and so forth. The maths are the same thing, right? The way Meta, you know, I think that was in 2020, right? Produced an integrator that was better than Mathematica was producing millions of examples of and doing beam search and all that kind of stuff, right? Beam search is their model, the situations in which the chain of thought or the chain of doing stuff is that you generate 5 solutions, and then you look at the 5 solutions, and then out of the 5, maybe you have the best one, or they qualitatively different, and so on, right? So yeah, then here the hallucinations, we didn't see material hallucinations when it comes to reading, except a bit when if your prompting is not precise, the machine was confusing this idea of Q, of the fact that the reporting of Apple is 1 quarter ahead, so to speak, right? So it's September, so the last quarter for the other companies is the first quarter for Apple, and there's some other companies that report that way. So if you don't prompt well and you ask, how about Q1? Then the machine can go and say, oh, I'm confused because you know, you gave me the Q2, right? And you ask now about Q1, right? So when they're right, also RAG, right? When it reads large amounts of text, you know, it might be producing hallucinations. And here, when you do time series, there's no such thing as hallucinations, right? So to speak, you prompt and it gives you, so to speak. But for example, when you write papers, right, hallucinations or the origin of hallucinations, for example, is citations. Papers sometimes have, for example, 3 versions, right? And machines get confused, right? So there you have to be, so when the problem is tough, so when the classification problem is tough, it's probably also going to be tough for the machine. Let's say if the author again has 3 preprints somewhere, right? And the machine kind of picks one instead of another, you know, it might be wrong with the year, it might be wrong. Then the firewalls, right? Then the news, right? That the machine maybe hasn't read Financial Times instead of, you see what I mean? So there's a lot of, yeah. Yeah,
All right,
yes, please.
try to make it short.
Thanks. Like, actually wondering, is there any way to control or detect if the LN is doing hallucinating? Because we want the LN to make our life easier. We don't want to check like each data point is correct, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So when do you have to? So you know, if you're trading a book of you know, if you're trading a book of options, right? A huge book. You ask the machine to do NLP and to compute the collateral for you. You cannot afford, right? You should use 4 eyes, so to speak, right? So in everything that can create a liability for your company, you have to devise, you know, controls, right? The same thing for agents. So agents that are obviously very exciting idea, right, of creating LLMs that assign a specific task and so on, they also have hallucinations. So this is something you have to be taken care of, or it's going to be easy. It's easy. So you're going to be fired, right? Because you're going to do a big mistake and right. In the end, LLMs remind us a lot working with people, right? You see, we do mistakes. If it's a very delicate thing, somebody else has to, if we write a paper, you know, one does the derivations, the other checks the derivations. Are they right? Have you done a mistake? Or the code or the experiments? You know, there are literally lots of, so this is not like the old coding in which you had always the ground truth, in the sense that we compute the mortgage payment. We know the maturity, we know the conditions, so we know the answer. So we can check if this is right. But you have to devise a way to spot hallucinations. Again, a very efficient one is using other LLMs. Okay. But still, for example, if you ask Claude 3.5, do these 5 papers exist? It doesn't know, right? So the only way to verify this is Google search, right? You see what I mean, right? So this tells you, you know, the kind of the ones who have done NLP and who were doing web scraping, right? It was a nightmare, the web scraping. Imagine reading internet and trying to, right? So you still need that mindset that a mistake in a cell of a spreadsheet can cause us losses of 2 billion. If this is value at risk, right? And somebody has, right, that has happened, right? That just a mistake in a spreadsheet has cost, you know, billions of losses to JP Morgan, right? So here we have fragile systems, so to speak. The same way you have fragile humans doing stuff, dealing with spreadsheets, right? Computing risk and so on. And somebody else has to be, if it's somebody else has to be checking, right? And yeah, so
we have a few online questions that I'll try to compress a little bit into one, and people are interested in especially this fundamental equity analyst and how they might work with an LLM. And, you know, essentially the question seemed to say that there's a spectrum between facts, which is, you know, what we have here, operating income increased from X to Y. And then we have the other extreme is the opinions. And that's maybe why we pay these analysts to sort of weigh between 2 simultaneous stories, a bullish and a bearish story. And they make a sort of judgment, a probabilistic idea in their heads that ultimately makes them decide. So I'm curious, I mean, the question that the person is asking here is, you know, how do these 2 fit together? You know, here do you expect the LLMs to sort of merge into a good process with these analysts?
Yeah. No, so yeah, we've been asked lots of questions about well, obviously also about if this is going to lead us to a more crowded market. It can, obviously, if for some reason people falls in love with Claude 3.5 because somebody says that he's picking tech stocks better than others, right? And now everybody, you know, is following recommendations. So maybe the SEC is worried because everybody's going to be crowded and so on and so forth. So this is one thing, right? Then, so how do we operate with these entropy things, right? Meaning that, you know, the markets have high entropy, right? So we kind of don't know what's going to happen, right? Until when it happens, so to speak. So in 2 years, we will know the revenues of Apple. Today, we don't know. what are going to be the revenues of Apple in 2025. So how people tries to do that. So you do supervised learning, you do factor models, right? You try to either use, you know, XGBoost or linear factor model and so on and so forth, right? You also, obviously now you have another, right, is you can incorporate textual information and do sentiment and all that kind of stuff, which is, eventually, when we all do the same thing, you know, markets are going to be efficient. We're back to square one. Also, right? Because so we don't have I think there's no answer on that, right? In the sense that what it's clear is that the past ain't going to be a problem. We'll know everything about the past. That's for sure. Now we have infinite memory. You know, we know everything that Elon has ever said in an earnings call. You can ask the machine, you know, run sentiment analysis on all the Tesla, you know, only the Elon Musk part. And then you tell me if today he was more or less optimistic about autonomous cars. You can even do sentiment by topic, right? Was he more positive on autonomous car than he was? And so on and so forth. So now language becomes some sort of queryable, so to speak, or you see what I mean? So we're going to even be can be digging deeper, right, on this, right? But we will all have this, right? Maybe again, right? The portfolio manager is kind of understanding better how he needs to combine these things, right? But nobody's going to be able to live without them because you're going to need answers 1 second after the earnings release. You should have analyzed everything, not just something, everything, right? So you're going to need elements, right, to digest this information fast. Also the earnings call, right? You're going to be listening to the earnings call. You're going to be comparing with the last quarter. We're going to be comparing with others, see the guys are more positive, more negative, and so on, right? And also something that it's not easy is to combine this with news. News are very, the most interesting example was everybody was calling us saying when Microsoft had that problem with the airports and so on, right? And you say, no, there's no other way than some sort of keeping the eye on what's going on, right? News have the same problem. News don't know the entropy. They also are trying to combat entropy, but they don't know if this is going to last 4 days, 2 days, 2 hours, 5 hours. You see, so it's the perception of the market of how serious is the issue going to last, and so on, right? So we'll always have the uncertainty over, you know, now we know things now, what's going to happen next. And a good analogy is sports. Good analogy is sports, right? Sports are built in a way that there's entropy in such a way that you don't know the result of the Giants versus Jets, you know, until the game is finished, right? You can forecast, you can say, but the game has to be played, right? And this is why it's interesting, right? Because if we could, and markets are kind of a high entropy kind of thing, right? Highly dimensional, you know, cause and effects are not. Yeah, and maybe this also wanted to mention, so this idea of causality, some people is using them, right? There's no reason on why LLMs should now discover causality where humans also are having a hard time defining it. You see what I mean? So again, we should always be aware of what we're trying to do, right? You see, if we humans don't really know a portfolio manager, what's the causality between this and that in the financial markets, a machine that it's reading kind of the same stuff, you know, it might infer causality, but it's also going to be an opinion of the model, right? An opinion of the LLM that when this happens, inflation tends to go up and so on. But
so I have one last question from online. Is there anybody in the audience though that wants to ask something, or shall I go with the final question? Okay, so the last question is about multi-agent approaches. I don't know if you've tried to use them, but you know, the question refers to fetching information, summarizing, and then validating numbers and passing them to another agent. I don't know if that's something you've experimented with.
Yeah, a lot of people is saying agents are, and I do have the same opinion, but agents are also delicate artificial beings, right? We are prone to hallucinations, right? So agents might not execute the code that you ask them to do, right? And so on. So agents operate under a bit, the same, environment, but agents might be interesting. So one way that, for example, you can recreate the how humans operate is that you create an agent and you say you're going to be the one that in the committee you're going to make all the points in regards to risk drivers. So you are kind of the devil's advocate that says, Tesla is going to have lots of problems, right? Another is going to be maybe, more kind of growth oriented, right? So you can recreate a bit that. I'm not saying that, right? That might improve decision making, right? If you use agents that have different ideologies, right? You task an LLM to say you're going to be the Warren Buffett of the committee. You're going to be the economist saying we're going to have 30 recessions and so on. And that's how the committee kind of tries to evaluate and weight the different thoughts and so on. But they're delicate beings, right? They operate under the same, are not deterministic, so to speak. So I think sometimes people forget that and oversells a bit the agents, right? You can prompt, you can also use prompting to do different things and so on. Anyway, but that's a very good point.
Yeah, so I guess I suggest we end on this note. Thank you very much, Miquel.